Hello everyone, this is Goosebumps Godzilla, and today I'm going to try to figure out the true identity of the ants that appear in the short story, Awesome Ants. But, along with this video comes spoilers for the short story from Even More Tales Give You Goosebumps, Awesome Ants. Also some medium-sized spoilers for Don't Go to Sleep. I'm basically going to be going over the basic premise of the story and go in very little detail on its main antagonist of the book, the Reality Police. So, if you haven't read that book, then I would kind of recommend you do not watch this video. I'm not going to completely ruin the book for you. So, I mean, if you do not want any of the book spoiled for you, then I would highly recommend you do not watch this video. But I'm not going to completely ruin it. And also, there's going to be some minor spoilers for A Shocker on Shock Street. But anyway, guys, first, before you try to figure out the true identity of the ants that appear in Awesome Ants, let's first take a look at, sort of what they do in the book that they appeared in, Even More Tales Give You Goosebumps, in the short story, Awesome Ants. So pretty much in the short story, the main protagonist orders this ant farm for his science project. But when he gets it, he figures out he has a jumbo-sized ant farm as part of an experiment that the company called Awesome Ants is using on their customers. And so pretty much the main protagonist gets it and puts it in his backyard, and the instructions to the ant farm, stuff like that, say to feed these ants this mysterious blue capsule. So he drops it in to feed them, and the ants do not seem to eat it at all. And so, worried because he's not getting any results for his science project, he goes over and tries to feed them real food. And even his best friend, I think, even feeds, like, the ants a caterpillar. It was really weird. So anyway, he feeds the ants some real food, like dinner scraps or something like that. And then he notices something, that the ants are beginning to grow. And so, at first, he doesn't really think anything about it and thought it maybe be science results. That would be great for a science project. So he takes the ants over to the school, and the main protagonist doesn't really think about anything after that. Then one day, after he goes out to check on his ants, he figures out that there are no more ants in the ant farm. And so then he goes to school, or something like that, and he sees this giant ant. And at first, at that current point in time, he thinks that his entire science class has been kidnapped by that giant ant. So he runs away from the giant ant, and he's constantly being chased by it. And then he goes in his backyard, where he finds a whole lot of other giant ants. And anyway, one thing leads to another. They feed him those blue capsules from the beginning, and that causes him to shrink down to ant size, where the ants study them in the ant farm that the main protagonist was supposed to study the ants in. And so pretty much his entire science class is in there, and that's kind of how the book ends. And so just judging from that entire short story, we do learn a lot of things about the ants. And first thing is, they're definitely not your average ants. And the company who brought the main protagonist, the ants, most likely are not, a good company. Awesome Ants is probably, something like the area, the, remote company in the short story from Tales Give You Goosebumps, Click. It's going to be something more like that, I believe, at least. So, it seems like they're giving their customers, or at least this customer, which is the main protagonist, basically magical ants, it seems like, because if you just take a look at these ants, there's something very abnormal about them. When you feed them just normal food, they begin to grow. And they're also very intelligent. They know when to knock out your main protagonist, I think. They also only target the science class. Also, if you take a look at the thing, they didn't bust open the glass cage that holds the ants in there. They didn't bust it open, and that has to be a sign of smartness, because wouldn't they just grow out and they wouldn't disappear? But then again, that may be that the ants that were brought into the science lab are the only ones that actually grew, due to there not actually being that many ants. I mean, they did say in the story that there were a bunch of them, But if there was an entire colony of all the ones they got in that jumbo-sized one, then I think there'd be a whole lot more rummaging through the streets and stuff like that, no matter how intelligent they are. And so I would say that maybe the giant ants killed the other ants, because if you take a look at just, natural stuff and all that, when ants from different colonies coexist, they usually, fight each other and stuff like that, I believe. I've heard that before. And so, if that is the case, then it could be the same case with these other ants that grew huge. So, all the ones that were brought to the science lab were most likely these different colony of ants, and they were responsible for killing or something like that all the other ants that were in there after they became giant. And these guys are super intelligent and can grow when they are fed real food, and are intelligent enough to use those blue capsules that when someone eats it will make them shrink. And that's another thing we learned about this company. Most likely, this company is maybe studying humans or something like that, because that's what it seems like is happening in the story Awesome Ants. After the ants become huge, they drop the main protagonist and his entire science class in basically this glass cage, just like the ant farm, except now the humans are taking their place. And so, I believe then that they would be studying them, or something like that. Maybe the giant ants work at the Awesome Ants company, but I don't really know about that. I think, that kind of would be wrong, because they're basically killing other ants for no apparent reason, due to all those ants disappearing, and most likely the ants would bust open the cage, if they grew that big. I mean, even they can't be that intelligent, but these guys really are intelligent. They can hold down the main protagonist, and they know about these blue capsules that Awesome Ants creates, and they also know that the ants will not eat the blue capsules, and so most likely the company Awesome Ants does not have humanity's best interest, or at least the main protagonist's best interest. I think it has something to do with studying humans. I think this is heavily implied in the episode for the ants to be studying the humans at the very end, because I think you can see the giant ants, looming over the glass cage that those people live in. So it is a possibility that this is the case. And also, most likely they're going to bring the main protagonist and all of them to the Awesome Ants facility, because when the main protagonist's parents or relatives or something like that, or neighbors even, can notice that there's a bunch of giant ants and that they have a bunch of little people inside of the glass cage, someone will eventually notice that. And it seems to be that this whole plan seems very well thought out. The ants seem to be intelligent enough to do that, and the whole blue capsule thing seems to be planned out. So, just compiling all this evidence, we can see that the company Awesome Ants is not, your classic good guys, and actually do not have humanity's best interest at heart, and could possibly be a company of giant ants themselves, or something similar to that, who want to study humans, or, something along those lines. And, just gathering from all that, I think we can make a couple of definitive decisions on who these guys are. And I think I have 3 different choices for who the Awesome Ants are, how come they grow so big, and all that stuff. And so, 2 of them have something to do with Don't Go to Sleep. But first, let's talk about the first one, or first option of who the Awesome Ants might be, why they grow, and all that stuff. And that could easily be monster blood. Because just think about it. These ants are growing and growing and growing, very similar to monster blood. That's pretty much what monster blood does. If something or someone eats monster blood, then they will continue to grow and grow and grow. I think that maybe the company Awesome Ants would feed these ants some of the monster blood, and that would cause them to grow and grow and grow, but they only fed them trace amounts, because small amounts of monster blood really doesn't make you that big. I mean, over time it does make you big, but it's a very slow change and all that stuff. And so I think that's what happened maybe in Awesome Ants, is that maybe the people were experimenting on the ants, or something like that, and they gave it to the main protagonist, and they filled them with monster blood, and maybe actually they want them to study the human kids, or maybe it's a test for the blue capsules. I'm not really sure why the company would do this, but it's a huge possibility for them to feed the monster blood to the ants, because that would explain why the ants grew so big, because, you have to admit, your average ants do not just eat stuff and then grow really big, obviously. And so, why would these ants do so? I have a couple of other theories about aliens and stuff like that, but this could explain why the ants are growing. It's not because the main protagonist is feeding him all that stuff, but it's actually because of the monster blood. And you might say, though, how does that make the ants so intelligent? After all, they know about the blue capsules and how it makes you shrink and all that stuff. So how could these guys be intelligent? But I think monster blood also heightens your intelligence, because if you take a look at the Walt Disney World Goosebumps attraction that you can see on video, I think on YouTube, because back in the day, like in 1998 or so, there's actually a Disney World Goosebumps attraction, and they had this little show about Horrorland and stuff like that. And one of the characters featured there was Cuddles the hamster. Now, this is guaranteed to be the time when Cuddles has eaten monster blood. And if you take a look in the show, not monster blood, Cuddles the hamster seems to be very intelligent. I believe he's taking orders from other people. He's understanding English. He's not just a chaotic monster. He actually understands orders, it seems like. And so, if that is the case, then that could mean that the monster blood is making him more intelligent. Because if you look at him before he ate the monster blood, in Monster Blood 2, while I'm not going to get into too much detail on that, it didn't seem that intelligent. And so, also, as a final bit of evidence for this monster blood theory about the ants, if you take a look at the episode, I believe this one guy in the episode squeezed one of the ants. It wasn't a giant ant, it was just some random ant that he squeezed, but had this unrealistic amount of ooze, I believe, coming out of it. And I believe, I haven't seen the episode in such a long time, it's one of the best episodes ever, but I haven't seen that one in a little while. I believe, at least, though, that a bunch of green goo came out after he squeezed the ant, possibly meaning that the ant had eaten a lot of monster blood. And so, there's other things that, kind of disprove this, and there's a few questions left unanswered, like why, the company would ever give this child ants, and, maybe they were testing out the blue capsule stuff, and they thought that was the only way to get away with it, or maybe they're testing out monster blood. I'm not really sure, but I don't really see why the company would do that. And so there are some setbacks to the point that it's a little unbelievable, but there is some evidence to prove the whole monster blood statement. And the next theory I have is that the ants came out of a comic book. And so you see the ants, they're giant and they keep on growing and all that stuff. And I think that maybe there's really not that much evidence to support it, but I think they could possibly be comic book monsters that escaped from the comic book world, like in Dr. Maniac Will See You Now, and they come out and they start wreaking havoc and possibly wanting to study humans. And the reason I have this theory is because of the 54th Goosebumps book in the original series, Don't Go to Sleep. Because if you read like the first or second chapter or so, the main protagonist is reading a comic called, like, An Attack on Pluto, or something like that. I can't remember the exact words to that comic, but I believe they said that there were a bunch of giant worms, but giant ants that could fire rays and stuff like that out of their mouths, or I can't remember the exact thing, I'm so sorry, guys, but basically, there's a bunch of giant ants in that story, and so there's not that much evidence to prove it. It is a possibility that this could have happened due to, that being a giant ant comic book and all that stuff. Again, not that much evidence to prove it, but there is a giant ant comic book, and in past events in Goosebumps books, stuff has escaped from the comic book world and came to the real world, so it's not that big of a stretch, but there's not that much evidence to prove it. And so next, guys, we have another theory, and that is that the Awesome Ants story is actually a Shock Street film. And this actually would make a whole lot of sense, because you can see a lot of giant insects and stuff like that in Shock Street films. If you take a look at, the beginning to, the Shock Street movie that you see in the beginning to A Shocker on Shock Street. In the beginning of the 35th Goosebumps book, A Shocker on Shock Street, they had a movie playing about, some giant wolf spider or something like that. And while it's not an insect, it's very similar to that. And also, later on in the book, they had the Cave of the Living Creeps, or Creatures. I can't remember, I haven't read that book in a little while either. But pretty much in that area, there was a giant praying mantis that you can also see in the Goosebumps film. And so it's pretty much guaranteed that the giant praying mantis that you see in that book is most likely real and not just a fake, due to it spewing out black acid and all that stuff and having some sort of superpowers, and meaning it's a special insect, just like the ones from Awesome Ants. Both special insects, because I don't believe normal praying mantises shoot black tar out of their mouths that makes people or animals or the insects that they eat not be able to move. I don't think natural praying mantises do that, but the giant praying mantises do. That gives them special abilities, just like the ones from Awesome Ants. The ones from Awesome Ants are very intelligent and can use the blue capsules and all that stuff, so which is a huge possibility. And it makes sense for them to do that. It makes sense for the company due to it being Shock Street and all that stuff goes on. So, really, there's a lot of evidence to prove this, just judging from the praying mantis thing and all that. And you can see the similarities between those two. And also, you can get it from Don't Go to Sleep Again. Because, actually, the Giant Ants Pluto comic, or something like that, could actually be tied to Shock Street. And so this one's a bit of a stretch, but it kind of does make sense. And so I personally believe, really fast, that Don't Go to Sleep was all a dream. All the events of that was a dream. Because just think about it. That bed that the main protagonist slept on, that supposedly went through him in so many dimensions and stuff like that, his grandparents slept on every year, as said in the story. And so if that is the case, and that means that the grandparents, for every year, they sleep in that one area, and they constantly go through different dimensions every year, and they don't say anything about it or never go back there ever again. I highly doubt that, which makes me believe that maybe all the events of the Don't Go to Sleep was all a dream. And in that dream, it featured its main antagonist, which is Bruce and Wayne, and their name is the Reality Police. And also, I believe in the Goosebumps credits, you can see the cover art to A Shocker on Shock Street or something like that. But on there, they had, the Reality Police Department. In the Goosebumps credits at Shock Street, they had the Reality Police Department. That means that the Reality Police is, part of the Shocker on Shock Street films, ultimately proving that Don't Go to Sleep was all a dream, and possibly the giant ants could have something to do with it. After all, I said earlier that the ants have very much similarities between the giant praying mantises, and it seems to fit with the style of the Shock Street films for constantly having, giant insects in there, and then you have him reading that attack, giant ants on Pluto story, and I believe that it is a possibility due to the Reality Police being Shock Street people and all that stuff, possibly meaning that the giant ants are, just due to it fitting that style, and, all of them have giant insects, and the main protagonist is obviously very familiar with Shock Street due to him supposedly being a fan of fiction and all that stuff. So I think it is a huge possibility that this could be the case. But again, there's not that much evidence to prove it. I actually have extra evidence for my second thing about the Pluto thing. Is also, since these ants are from Pluto, it would actually make sense for the company Awesome Ants to want to study humans, because they're ants on Pluto, and if they are ants on Pluto, they probably want to study humans, which would make sense why the Awesome Ants thing happens in the first place. So there's an extra bit of evidence for the second theory. Not that much evidence for the third one, other than you can just see similarities and all that, but it's not that big of evidence, I don't believe. But I believe the most likely out of all of them, though, is the Monster Blood one, due to there being so much evidence to prove it with, the squishing of the ant in the episode and all that stuff. But comment down below what you think is the most likely theory. And if you do have any extra thoughts and, any extra theories or something like that on why the Awesome Ants behave like they do in the book, then comment down below what you think. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and that is the end of my video.